Hi, my name is Joy Axelson, and we're going to be looking at 2nd and 3rd John and looking at some vertical chart helps. So we're going to looking at some specific things in each of these books. Do you remember from the teaching on 1st John, where in that letter, John the Apostle gave the believers 3 tests to help them identify between true teachers, true believers, and false teachers. They were the test of love, the test of obedience, and the test of correct doctrine. We see these tests again in 2nd and 3rd John, where John emphasizes again in these letters of how believers are to be obedient to Jesus by showing and living in love with each other, but also living their lifestyles with true doctrine. So let's look at some specific things with 2nd John. Some key repeated words in this book are truth, abide, command or commandment, and love. So in 2nd John, there's an emphasis on abiding and walking in the truth. And this happens in 2 ways. By them being obedient to Jesus' command to love each other, and secondly, to protect themselves from false teachers by identifying what they're teaching and not associating with them. So from verse 4, we can read that. I rejoice greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. So we see that some of the believers are walking in truth, but some of them had been influenced by these false teachers who they showed hospitality to and invited them into their home church, and they were led astray. I'm not going to go into great detail of verses 1 through 6, but you need to think about, why does the author emphasize that they need to walk in obedience of love? And how will this help protect them against the false teaching? So let's look a little bit about the false teachers, and let's read verse 7 through 11. For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such one is a deceiver and an antichrist. Watch yourselves, so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes ahead and does not abide in the teachings of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greetings, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. So, how are the false teachers described here? John describes them as deceivers going out into the world in verse 7, as Antichrist in verse 7. Verse 9, he says they do not abide in the teachings of Christ. And he implies in verse 9 that they do not have God. And also in verse 11, they have wicked works. So what are they teaching? In verse 7, we can find out that they do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. So these would have been traveling teachers who were possibly teaching some pre-Gnostic ideas, that Jesus was not both God and man. They denied the incarnation of Christ. Perhaps this was a form of Cerinthianism. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but that was the idea, the Gnostic idea, that the spiritual form of Christ came upon the physical Jesus at his baptism and then left him at his death. But the main point that John's coming against here is that Jesus was not both God and man. John was very concerned about this, that the truth of the gospel be upheld and understood by the original readers, that Jesus was the Christ who came in flesh. He was 100% God, 100% man. This is the fundamental beliefs of Christianity. The incarnation and the atonement are important, and they have to have happened for us to have salvation and grace. And this was being destroyed by the false teachers. So one of John's main points here is that through this house church supporting, or through this lady and her family, whoever you think the original reader is, through them supporting and giving hospitalities to these false teachers, resulted in the spread of their lives and other people being brought into this deception. So how were the believers, the original reader, to protect themselves against these false teachers? Well, you can observe in verse 8 it says that they are to watch themselves. In verse 9, they are to abide in the teachings of Christ. In verse 10, they are to not receive or give any greetings to the false teachers. In verse 11, if they do, they are basically participating in the false teaching. Those are pretty strong words. But John's point here is that the believers show hospitality to these false teachers. Other house churches might think, oh, they're okay, they're good people, and they might invite them into their home, their house churches or home churches, and then these lies and deception are spread to other people. So it's very dangerous. So they have to be protected, and they have to protect themselves and other people from the lies of these false teachers. So these believers need to stand in the truth of the gospel, of the doctrine, true doctrine of Christ. They need to be obedient, to show love to each other, and to not allow false teachers to come in and preach what contradicts the truth of the gospel. They are not to support these false teachers in any way by associating with them, helping them financially, inviting them to their home churches. No, none of that. So, for application, aren't we as Christians supposed to show hospitality and love to all people? Well, I think we are called to do that, for sure, especially as a way to witness to non-believers, people of other faiths, of even those we know that are occult groups, that we can show them hospitality and show them love. But I think the main point that John is showing here is that if we were to invite these type of people to teach in our home groups or even our churches, or if you're involved in a home church, that's where the danger lies. That we are not allowed to allow these people to teach in our local fellowships. We're not to give them money financially to help them spread their lies to other people. Another way that we need to protect ourselves and to protect others is we need to know the truth. We need to be able to identify false teachers through knowing what the truth of the gospel is. We also need to listen carefully to what people teach to see, is it the truth or not. Okay, let's look now at a little bit more specific at 3 John. 3 John was a personal letter to Gaius, and John the Apostle is writing to encourage him to continue to help and to support the traveling missionaries. Perhaps Gaius had been discouraged by Diotrephes and stopped doing this. It seems like both Gaius and Diotrephes were church leaders, but Diotrephes, he was very prideful and he was a controlling leader. You know, he would discourage people in his fellowship to not show support to these traveling missionaries, and he would even excommunicate those who did. So he's not a good guy. So in this letter, you need to look at the contrast that John shows between Gaius and Diotrephes. Observe how John and others testify about Gaius and Demetrius, that they're true believers, and that shows their true testimony. So I just want to briefly look at 3 John verses 5 through 8. And it says, "Beloved, it is a faithful thing that you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testify to you your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God. For they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth. So these were traveling missionary teachers. They were true believers because they were sacrificing their life in service for Jesus. The phrase accepting nothing from the Gentiles mean that they didn't accept money financially from non-believers. Remember that there were many traveling philosophers, teachers in the Roman Empire who taught for money and reputation. But these real, genuine Christian teachers were not like this. They were not in it for the greed or for prestige, but they were in it for the sake of the gospel. So Paul is telling Gaius to continue to show hospitality to people like this, because it was important that the gospel be spread and that other churches be encouraged through these missionaries. And Paul's saying, basically, if he's in doubt, if he doesn't know who these missionaries are, well, then he needs to know those people who are sending him out, like John knows Demetrius and is recommending him. So there are several things that we can take away from this book in application. Number one, we are to show hospitality to fellow believers. Secondly, just as John personally knew and recommended Demetrius to Gaius, it's important that we know who we accept as teachers in our churches or in our YWAM schools. Do we know them personally? Do we know their doctrine, or the people that recommend them? Do we know them well enough to know that people they recommend would be good quality people? And thirdly, John knew how to encourage leaders who were doing well, who had godly lifestyle, but he wasn't afraid to confront or deal with leaders who had problems in their behavior and in their motives. So it's important that we encourage leaders who are walking and living in the truth, but that we also can deal and help those who are not living godly lifestyles or who are a little bit off in their doctrine. Thank you.